Good morning, students. Today I am going to take a poem after Blenhiem. After Blenhiem by Robert Southey. Alright, now this poem was written in the year 1796. And this poem is talking about a battle that took place in this particular place, Blenheim. Alright, Blenheim or Blenheim as it was, Blenheim as it was called, was a place in Austria or a part of Germany, or southern Germany, the southern part of Germany. The southern part of Germany on the banks of river Danube. On the left bank of the river Danube. So that is the place where the battle is taking place. And the cause for this battle was a very trivial one. Very trivial. That means very simple cause. The cause for this battle was the Spanish succession. So therefore, the name of this war is known as the War of Spanish Succession. Alright? In the year 1700, the Charles II of Spain. Charles II of Spain dies childless. So the King of Spain, Charles II, dies in 1700 without having a successor because he was childless. Right? As a result of this, and his nearest heirs, people who are connected with him, who are closely related to him, belonged to two families. One was the Austrian and the other was French. Two families. The one was an Austrian family, that was the Habsburgs, right? Habsburgs, the Austrian family of Habsburgs was closely related to him, and the French family of Bourbons. Alright? And the French family of Bourbons. So, now, the situation was that the King of Spain dies in 1700, leaving no issue, no child. And the families that had a right to succeed either belonged to the Austrian family of Habsburgs or the French family of Bourbons. And then the issue was, now who will succeed to the throne of Spain? Who will succeed to the throne of Spain? And naturally it should be the Habsburgs or the Bourbons. Now, the succession would mean that they become very powerful. If the Austrian prince succeeded to the throne of Spain, or the French king succeeded to the throne of Spain, it's going to impact the balance of power in Europe. Balance of power in Europe is going to be disturbed. In other words, the Spain become either part of French or Germany. So that there is going to be a big issue. So the balance of power is going to be disturbed. In other words, Spain is going to become so powerful. And that was the cause of this war. Therefore, the armies of England, who had a great interest in Europe, entered into a war on the side of against this happening. So you had Franco-Bavarian combination. So this was part of Bavaria, right? The Austria, one part of the Bavaria, the Prince of Bavaria was interested in it, and so also the French. And the French and Bavarians combined together fought against the British. And the two names that come up here are the Prince of Marlborough. The Prince of Marlborough and the Duke of Marlborough the Duke of Marlborough and Prince Eugene of Austria. These were the two people who led the forces, the combined forces. And here you have, they became very famous because of this battle. And we have a name. And this one who led the battle against the Franco-Bavarian army. It was the Duke of Marlborough who led it, and against the General Prince Eugene, who led the Franco-Austrian troops, or Franco-Bavarian troops. Okay. Now, so this was basically there was a fear among the British that once Spain become very powerful, it is going to disturb the balance of power in Europe, and that was the reason for this battle. After the death of the King of Spain, Charles II, in 1700. So the battle was fought between. The Battle of Blenhiem was fought between 1701 to 1740. It was a long drawn out battle. Okay. And now, so that is the background to the poem. But the poem is talking about a theme. And what is the theme? He is talking about the futility of war. The futility of war. is basically discussing the uselessness. Futility means uselessness. It's worthless to fight a battle. Any battle, any war is a useless thing. Alright? Therefore, we call it an anti-war poem. Anti means against. Anti-war. Alright? So basically the battle of, or the after Blenhiem is a poem written as an anti-war poem. You see? Anti means against, war. Okay, so that is it. The poem is an anti-war poem written by, it talks about the worthlessness or uselessness of any battle. Alright, and as the poem, usually every poem has a particular form, and some poems like the sonnets are there, then you have epics are there, then you have various types of poems are there, and this particular poem is a ballad. What's the ballad? Ballad is a narrative poem telling a story. A narrative poem telling us a story. So that is the quality of a ballad. Now originally this type of poem, ballad, was transmitted orally. That means by word of mouth. There were people who would go around singing, and they were called as minstrels. What were they called as? Minstrels. They were wandering singers. They would go from place to place telling a story in poem. Alright? Or in poetry. Okay. And they were quite popular, and therefore these ballads were usually transmitted orally and not in written form. Originally, ballads were sung by minstrels or wandering poets or wandering singers. Then, and therefore, as it is, it was meant, it had to be memorized by these poets who were telling this story in poem. They employed certain techniques in it. They had a special style, and the style that is followed in this particular one is a conversation. The style of this poem is in the form of a conversation. A conversation that happens between two generations. Okay? The old man Caspar and his two grandchildren, Wilhelmine and Peterkin, two grandchildren. So a conversation that takes place between these people belonging to two age groups. The old man Caspar and the young his grandchildren Peterkin and Wilhelmine. Okay, so that's the style that is followed in this, the style of a conversation between two. And then a ballad usually employs certain elements that makes it easy for the person to remember. And one of them, and more attractive, and one of them is a refrain. What's a refrain? A refrain is a repetition repetition of a phrase. Refrain means repetition of a phrase, a word, or verses. Okay. Refrain is a repetition. Repetition of what? Maybe a phrase, maybe a verse, or maybe verses. What is a verse? Verse is a line. Just like in prose, we call a sentence. In a poetry, we call a sentence a verse. And verses therefore means sentences. In a poem is known as verses. Okay. So you have a refrain happening like in this. For instance, you will find a repetition of a line. For instance, that it was a famous victory. The old Casper repeats a number of times this particular thing at the end of stanzas, that it was a famous victory, for instance. Okay. Then the next quality that you notice in this is it follows a particular rhyme scheme. I have explained to you what's a rhyme. Rhyme is a repetition of a syllable at the end of each line, alright, which rhymes with each other. And as per that, so you have here the rhyme scheme that is followed is, the rhyme scheme is, this follows the rhyme scheme. The rhyme scheme that is followed is A, B, C, B and D, D. So each stanza of this particular poem has how many lines? 6 lines. 6 lines. Alright? And the first line does not match the ending of the first line. The ending sound of the first line does not match with any other. And the second and fourth line rhyme together. And then the third line does not match with any other. And the last 2 lines. The last 2 lines match each other in its ending sound. Like for instance, you have here the last 2 lines of and by him spotted on the green, his little grandchild Blenhiem. Alright, so you have here the green rhyming with Blenhiem. Blenhiem and the green rhyming together. That is D and T. Alright. Okay. And then, so that is the rhyme scheme is A, B, C, B and D, D. So each stanza contains 6 lines. Then, another quality that is employed is what we call alliteration. What is alliteration? I have told you earlier, an alliteration is a repetition of consonant sounds. Consonant sounds. Repetition of consonant sounds within a line. Within a line. Alright? So you have examples of such repetitions as it would happen here in this particular poem. You have, for instance, in the 3, 4. Ninth line, for instance, they say it was a shocking sight. They say it was a shocking sight. In the 9th stanza, you have, they say it was a shocking sight. Okay? So here you have repetition of ears, sight. Alright? So this is alliteration. Okay? These are alliterations. When we come to the text, I shall give you more instances. And then another thing that we notice in this particular poem is repetition. Repetition is naturally repeating an idea. And here, in each stanza, almost every stanza in this particular poem repeats an idea. The idea that it was a famous battle. The idea that it was a famous battle is repeated almost in every stanza. And the next quality that we notice is irony. Irony is what? Irony is a figure of speech in which you mean exactly opposite of what you say. When you want to say something, when you say something that is exactly opposite of what you really intend, we call it irony. Okay? So the greatest example of irony in the poem is, they say it was a famous. It was a famous victory. The old man Caspar repeats this idea. It was a famous victory a number of times. But what does he actually want to convey? What does the poet actually want to convey by saying this? He wants to say just the opposite of it. It was a waste of property, waste of lives. Thousands of soldiers sacrificed their lives, lost their lives in the battle. And their bodies lay rotting on the fields. Very inhuman death. Very inhuman death. They lost not only their lives, they lost their dignity as well. Alright? So that much for our introduction to this particular poem. So I have told you the background to the poem. That is, it was written about a battle. A historical battle that took place when there was this problem of succession to the throne of Spain. After the death of the King of Spain, Charles II, who died childless. And this happened in the year 1700. And then there was a long drawn out battle that was fought. And the actual battle of Blenhiem that we are talking about did happen in the year of 1704. 1704. And about this battle, the poet Robert Southey writes in a poem in 1796. And he wants to convey us a message. The worthlessness of war, the uselessness or the futility of war of all kinds. Battles ultimately cause loss of lives, property, and it makes not the soldiers who die in battle not only lose their lives, but they also die an inhuman death, or they face an inhuman death. They lose their dignity as well. But that is against the heroic ideas of battle, because soldiers were considered gallants in those days. There was heroism associated with the battles and soldiers. So he is talking against this kind of a false belief. The soldiers are not heroes, they die an inhuman death. That's what the poet wants to convey to us. And the poet has followed a particular format, a particular type of poetry, that is ballad. A ballad is a narrative poem telling a story. And it has certain peculiarities. And the first peculiarity is the original ballads were meant to be sung. And when it was sung, these poets going from place to place, they roamed the countryside, they sang these ballads. Singing ballads was a common entertainment. And these kind of wandering singers were called minstrels. Alright? So you have, for instance, in one of the popular forms of this kind of ballad, you have in Caribbeans, it's known as calypsos. Calypsos. People. There are people who go around singing calypsos. It is the version of Caribbean version of ballad. And then it has certain qualities of style. And the first style is, I said, it employs the style of a conversation between a grandfather and his grandchildren. Yes. Then it has what? A refrain, that is a repetition of lines. Then you have a rhyme scheme, a particular rhyme scheme, and the rhyme scheme that is followed in this is A, B, C, B, D, D. A, B, C, B, D, D. Alright? I had explained to you in the class earlier what a rhyme scheme is. The ending of a line. The ending of a line matching with another, or not matching with another. That's it. Okay. Then you have instances of alliteration. Repetition of consonant sounds within a line. Okay. Then you have repetition of an idea. And here I said it was a famous victory. The idea of a famous victory is repeated, but the poet actually questions, was it famous or was it just the opposite of it? Infamous. Okay. Then I said irony. Irony is a figure of speech which employs a technique whereby you mean to say one thing, whereas you intend to say exactly the opposite of what you mean to say. And the example is, it was a famous victory. But what do you really want to say? It was an infamous. Infamous and notorious thing. It's something worse could not have happened. Alright? Okay. Now, with this, I've given you a little bit of introduction, and now we proceed with the poem. Okay. Let's proceed with the poem here. So I shall read a few stanzas, and then after reading those few stanzas, we shall proceed further. Okay. After Blenhiem, it was a summer evening. Old Caspar's work was done, and he, before his cottage door, was sitting in the sun. And by him, spotted on the green, his little grandchild Wilhelmine. She saw her brother Peterkin roll something large and round, which he beside the rivulet in playing they had found. He came to ask what he had found that was so large and smooth and round. Old Caspar took it from the boy, who stood expectant by, and then the old man shook his head, and with a natural sigh, "It is some poor fellow's skull," said he, "who fell in the great victory. I find them in the garden, for there are many hereabout. And often when I go to plough, the ploughshare turned them out. For many thousand men," said he, "were slain in the great victory. Now tell us, what it was all about?" Young Peterkin cries. And little Wilhelmine looks up with wonder-waking eyes. "Now tell us all about the war and what they fought each other for." "It was the English," Caspar said, Caspar cried, "who put the French to rout. But what they fought each other for, I could not well make out. But everybody said," quoth he, "that it was a famous victory. My father lived at Blenhiem then, yon little stream hard by. They burned his dwelling to the ground, and he was forced to fly. So with his wife and child he fled, nor he where to rest his head. With fire and sword the country round was wasted far and wide, and many a childing mother then and newborn baby died. But then things like that, must be a famous victory. They say it was a shocking sight after the field was won, for many thousand bodies here lay rotting in the sun. But things like that, must be after a famous victory. Great praise the Duke of Marlborough won, and our good Prince Eugene. Why, it was a very wicked thing, said little Wilhelmine. Nay, nay, my little girl, quoth he, it was a famous victory. Who this great fight did win, but what good came of it at last, quoth little Peterkin. Why, that I cannot tell, said he, but it was a famous victory. So that is a lovely poem, a beautiful story in it, and with a great theme that this should not have happened. Battles are never to be fought. Okay, so it's an anti-war poem. Let's now go stanza by stanza. Alright? As we go, it was a summer evening, old Casper's work was done, and he before his cottage door was sitting in the sun. And by him spotted on the green his little grandchild Blenhiem. Alright? So it was a very we get a beautiful picture of an evening. The sun sets very late in the summers in this part of the world, and the old man, after a hard day's labor, he is a farmer by profession, and he is sitting and relaxing. And at that time, what happens? Old Casper's work was done, and he, before his cottage door, so in front of his cottage door, he is sitting there, and in the evening sun, and by him spotted means played. Spotted means played. He was playing there on the green, the lush green ground, was playing. His granddaughter Blenhiem was playing. His little grandchild Blenhiem. Blenhiem is a granddaughter. Now you must learn to spell that name, Blenhiem. Alright? So you learn to spell the name, Blenhiem. Now look at this. So you have the old man sitting there outside his cottage door, and you have the little children playing about. And first we notice Blenhiem, his granddaughter, playing about the lush green lawn. Lush green lawn. Okay. So she saw her brother Peterkin roll something large and round, which he beside the rivulet found. In playing there had found, he came to ask what he had found that was so large and smooth and round. Okay? And she saw her brother Peterkin. She was playing in front of the cottage door, in the lawn, the green lawn. As she was playing, she noticed something. Her brother was approaching him. And what was he doing? He was playing about with something that was round. Not only round, it was smooth and large. And what was it? Obviously, it was a human skull. But the children did not know it was a human skull. The children did not know that it was a human skull. See, he was playing ball with it. Possibly, or probably he thought that it was a ball. Alright? He did not know. So he came over. She saw her brother Peterkin roll something large and round. Round like let's say, a football. Okay? Something that was large and round, like a football. Which he beside the rivulet. Rivulet is a small river. Okay? A small river is called a rivulet. Just like a small of a pig is called piglet. Alright? A small of a pig is called what? A piglet. Okay. In the same way, a small river is called a rivulet. So he had found on the banks of the river, this particular object that was smooth and large and round. In playing there he had found, as he was playing about on the banks of the river, he had found it. And he came to ask what he had found. He wanted to know from his grandfather what object was this that was so large and smooth and round. So he wanted to know this. That's why he came. Old Caspar took it from the boy who stood expectant by, and then the old man shook his head and with a natural sigh, "'Tis some poor fellow's skull," said he, "who fell in the great victory." And the old man, old Caspar, the old man takes it. Peterkin's and Wilhelmine's grandfather takes this object that was lying there, and he takes it into his hand, and then what does he say? He says, "Took a round thing from the boy." Took this round thing from the boy who stood expectant by. Expectant by means waiting for an answer. In anticipation. In anticipation. Or eagerly waiting for an answer. In anticipation. Expectant by means eagerly waiting, or waiting in anticipation to an answer to the question that he had asked. And what was the question he had asked? What is this object that he had discovered on the banks of the rivulet? He had found it as he was playing about on the banks of the river. And the old man takes it, and then the old man shook his head. He shook his head as if to suggest, he knew the answer. Alright? Yeah, this is a very common sight, as if to suggest that this is a very common thing around here. And what does he say? And with a natural sigh, as he saw this, oh, yet another skull, kind of an expression, that sigh. Alright, he sighed and said, "It is some poor fellow's skull. It is some poor fellow." Poor fellow. Fellow here means, who is the poor fellow? It is some poor fellows, some soldiers. It is the skull of some soldier, said he, who fell in the great victory. Fell here means fell dead. Fell dead. Alright? Fell here means fell dead. Alright? So he says, this is the skull of a soldier who died in the battle of Blenhiem. Alright? In those days, the battles were fought on the ground, on open fields, usually, or plain areas were selected, where plain, flat land was selected, and the battles were fought face to face. Alright? Those days, we did not have such advanced technology, therefore, it was a battle between individuals in mass. Alright? Okay. So it says one of the soldiers who were killed in the battle. This was the skull of a person. And then what explanation does he give he gives the explanation.